If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And please join me on my website at nanice.com. Thank you.
It's your time for Chai with Nanice. Get ready for substance, clarity, change, and especially empowerment. Get ready to turn over stones, uncover stories, and get to the heart of the matter in every area of your life. Any mood runs, any emotion flies, and your dreams are within your grasp. There are no limits or boundaries, and your comfort zone is out of reach, yet it's the safest place you will ever be. Come in, sit down, and have some chai with Nanice.
Welcome to Chai with Nanice. I'm Nanice. Do you ever feel like you have anything to heal, or maybe you're on a healing path yourself right now? Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you're much closer than you think. The bad news is, well, there's nothing to heal. Oh, wait, how can that be bad news? Nothing to heal. Now, you may be thinking, well, I've got this problem and that problem, and, I've got all kinds of physical ailments or emotional ailments or, bad relationships. How could you mean there's nothing to heal? Well, the truth is we are all perfect right now, exactly where we are. Yes, that means you. You are perfect and powerful right now. So instead of thinking in terms of healing, which implies that there's something wrong, which actually locks us into a place of needing to be healed or needing to fix something that's wrong, instead of looking at it as healing, today I invite you to think of your healing as really a return to wholeness. A return to wholeness. Because that's what healing is. In fact, if you look it up, you'll find that healing really does mean a return to wholeness. Now, the other part of that is, if you're really smart and you're ahead of me here, which you just might be, you might be thinking that, well, if we're already whole and perfect, how can we return to it? Exactly. Well, there's often very, very challenging areas where we can't find the exact words to express things. And for me to say that you're already whole and yet to return to wholeness actually probably is as close as we can get today. The truth is, you are whole and perfect right now. And there is a return. And the return is not in doing anything. It's simply in remembering who you really are. It's remembering your power. It's remembering your worth. It's remembering your higher self. Your higher self as in this higher being which has an identity, who you really are, and your higher self as in source, that you truly are source. And the closer that we get to remembering who we really are, the closer we are to remembering our wholeness and in being whole. And so today, I invite you on a journey of wholeness. Joining me on this journey, joining you on this journey, is the beautiful and amazing Anita Pathik Law. I'm so excited to have her on the show today. She is truly an expert in this area, having found her own return to wholeness in many, many ways, and I'm hoping that she shares a little bit about that journey with us today. Anita Pathik Law, also known as Ani, isn't that beautiful? She is known as a midwife to the soul. She had a profound spiritual experience that resulted in the instant healing of a disease for which most believe there is no cure. How could that be? As founder of the Power of Our Way community and author of The Power of Our Way, A Path to a Collective Consciousness, Ani is an aspiring and well-respected voice in the consciousness movement. Over the last decade, her spiritual path has led her to several initiations in sacred, indigenous, spiritual practices and leadership roles on a Native American path. As a modern-day shaman, she sees herself as a facilitator and witness to the incredible capacity we all have to heal and transcend limitations that have been merely a result of our conditioning and a sense of fragmentation from our source and divine natures. Ani's teachings, healing work, meditations, writing, and song lyrics have easily integrated into the work she does today and around the globe. Her movies, such as Divinity Movie, The Power of My Way movie, and God Knows the Sound of Her Voice, her most recent sharing, have assisted her in her life and soul mission of raising consciousness and building bridges of higher understanding. At the end of the show, we'll also give her website so that you can find out more, and she has some amazing resources, so I definitely suggest downloading all her work and finding out more about what she has to offer. So, honey, welcome to Chai. Thanks for having Chai with me today.
Oh, my gosh. And do you know that I grew up drinking real chai made from my father, who was from India, like the real chai?
Really?
So when you invited me to come and have chai with you, I was like, oh, I would love to have chai with Nanice.
That is so awesome. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people don't even know what chai is, and they think, well, it means this too. In Hebrew, it means life, which is perfect, life with Nanice. But of course, it's tea, as we know. And before Starbucks, you know, made it popular in other, you know, coffee shops, most people really didn't know. And the show came about, Chai with Nanice, is I was trying to come up with, you know, a title. I was talking to my good friend, and we were talking about the format of the show, and he says, well, I had a vision about it. I had a vision. This was before the show, you know, was just in its idea process. And I'm like, well, what is your vision? And he says, well, my vision, it's just like, you know, we have all these amazing conversations with you. You met him and, you know, other friends that I have. And just to capture those conversations live on the air. And, you know, it's kind of like having chai with Nanice. And as soon as he said it, I knew that was it.
I love it. I love it. It's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited about sharing you with the world. Through my work here, you are an amazing, amazing healer and teacher, and an amazing journey. As I mentioned to you earlier when we spoke for a few minutes, I listened to your mastermind audios on your CD, and they were extraordinary and truly genius in the work of manifestation and so much more. So at the end of the show, if you would give that information as well, that would be just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Was that the Aligning with Mastermind audios?
It was the one that you said, I just found this and wanted to share it.
Oh, I sent it to you. Okay, I'll have to see.
Well, no, I actually found it before you sent it to me.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you're talking about.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure whatever audios anybody listens to.
Upon this.
Right, that's the one. That's the one. Would you share with our listeners a little bit about your healing and how that brought you to your path and that sacred journey?
Well, and I'll do my best to keep it short and sweet and summarize kind of the main points here. You know, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I was actually diagnosed with my first autoimmune disease in the form of hypothyroidism. And then when I was 12, I had my first quote-unquote flare-up. And initially they had diagnosed me with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and then bunches of other things. And ultimately, it finally landed with a diagnosis of lupus, and I also had fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. And I found myself many years later, I'm about 26 years old at this point in time. My second daughter had been born much against the medical advice of my rheumatologists. You know, I'd had 2 children, and was just in really, really bad shape. And I often will share that, you know, it wasn't that I was worried that I wouldn't heal. I was actually very often worried that I'd wake up in the morning, you know, back into that pain and the debilitation. And, I mean, there were stretches of time where, you know, I would have a tough time even changing my kids' diapers. And, about a year after my second daughter was born, my rheumatologist sat me down and had kind of the big talk with me about what my life was going to look like. And he really painted a very sad next few years, which included a very painful early death with a lot of drugs. And I said to him, and you know, you and I were just talking before the show about how sometimes things come out of our mouth and we're like, I wouldn't even have said that.
Right.
Actually, this is a perfect example where I said, that's just not an agreement I'm willing to make. And I walked out and I went home, and not that I recommend that people do this, because there was one medication that I shouldn't have thrown away, my thyroid med, but I just it was like my pendulum just swung so far. And I proceeded to make some changes. You know, what I really look at during that chunk of time was, I think probably the most accurate word to describe what I was experiencing was a process of liberation, and liberating myself from situations and thoughts and beliefs and ideas that would have led me into that early death. And that included leaving my first marriage with two babies in diapers, you know, and with really no clue as to how I was going to make it. But I did make that change, and I ended up coming back into a Unity church, and had gone to Unity as a kid. You know, even though my mom was Christian, my dad was Hindu, somehow or another we found Unity as young kids. And about 4 months later, I was actually alone in the woods and had an experience I can only call completely divine. I had an experience with my father, who had died when I was 18 years old, and God. And I had a complete healing from the lupus. And in that healing, I mean, there was a sunbeam of light. I was alone in the forest. I was having this conversation. If anybody had walked by me, they would have thought I was absolutely insane. But about 30 minutes later, I realized that for the first time in years, I had no pain and no fatigue. And it also was accompanied by, I think, this opening, you know, many people might call it an awakening, where I began to receive some really incredible guidance, instruction. I was being taught things during meditation. I did a lot of automatic writing. That was actually one of the biggest openings that particular day. And ultimately, that was in 1997. And ultimately, I ended up several years later leaving my career, my nice stable career. You know, my path was all lined up. And here we sit today, doing what I do. Yeah.
Wow. Can you share what that conversation was, or the the major points of the conversation?
I think it's pretty profound. You know, earlier when you were talking about healing and wholeness and sort of almost the dichotomy of the setup of today's conversation.
Yes.
One of the things that I think really creates the illusion of fragmentation within us are the collections of experiences that we have labeled as wounding or hurtful or damaging. And for me, some of that woundedness or the perception of woundedness and unwholeness really came from my relationship with my father, who, in spite of his, oh my gosh, talk about an amazing healer and a brilliant mind, he carried in some woundedness from his childhood, and he ultimately had become an alcoholic, although a highly functional alcoholic, but nevertheless an alcoholic who didn't always show up in the ways that we would hope our fathers would show up. And that conversation was really interesting because he was begging me for my forgiveness. He was so sad and he was so upset. I mean, this is him and his spirit. It really changed my understanding of what we have the potential to leave this earth with in terms of baggage, and ultimately possibly come back into the next lifetime with. I mean, that conversation he was just so filled with so much pain and guilt. And what I was saying was, it's okay. I have forgiven you. I am the person I am today. I'm becoming the person that I'm meant to be as a result of those experiences. Everything was perfect, and there was nothing to forgive. There had been I'd almost skipped in that moment. It's like I skipped from needing to do forgiveness work to being in complete gratitude for the life-shaping experiences of my upbringing and my relationship with my dad. And I think that forgiveness, it was so complete. It was probably the most complete forgiveness that I've ever experienced. Usually we have these layers and layers and layers, like I thought I was done with that.
Right.
it was
Well, you're
so
not done
complete.
until you get to gratitude. That I discovered is the key. If you haven't reached complete and utter gratitude, you haven't reached true forgiveness yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was like gratitude with, humility, and it wasn't just like thank you. It was like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. And I think that was what, in that moment, healed. My experience with autoimmune disease, and it was interesting. I've had a couple of clients, healing clients today and late last week where this theme came back up. My experience with autoimmune disease is that it really is a dis-ease process, right? That is self-annihilating. Think about it. Your immune system is turning against itself.
Right.
It's mistaking healthy cells and healthy physiological immune responses for something that it needs to combat or kill off within your own body.
Yeah.
And so I think that when we carry around resentment, there's a beautiful quote. There's so many different versions of it. I can't take ownership of this, but it's that resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And I think that, isn't that profound?
That is very profound.
And that resentment can create such a toxic environment within our minds, our spirits, and our bodies that we manifest that unwholeness or that illusion of unwholeness in a lot of different ways. For me, it was physically. But it was part of my path because as a healer, or as somebody, I don't even necessarily like calling myself a healer, except lack of any better expression that gets to the point. Because I really do see myself a return to wholeness. Yeah, midwife to the soul. It's just maybe it's about helping people to remember that wholeness and to return to that place, and as well as being really able to connect into a consciousness of a divine perspective. And when we can travel into that divine perspective within ourselves and in partnership with our source, there's just such profound healing. And those toxic thoughts of unforgiveness, of guilt, of shame, they create that sense of separation that then manifests itself in whatever pattern tends to quote unquote plague us, whatever it is for each individual person. I think that most of us have something to overcome and evolve through, right?
Yes. It's so interesting that we're talking about forgiveness too. I've had several epiphanies about forgiveness lately, and one of them being that very often somebody will say, "Oh, I have forgiven, my mother, my father, whoever," and they really believe that they have, but they're still saying the same things to themselves that parent said to them. So, an example, and this is actually how I had the epiphany. It was Christmas Eve, and the whole family was at dinner, and my daughter-in-law's father was with us, and we were talking about, his mother appearing to him, because I felt her presence, at dinner at Buca de Beppa's, and, and she had died a long time ago, and I said to Richard, I said, she's asking for your forgiveness, and he looked at me over, his lasagna or whatever he was having, and he said, I've forgiven her over and over and over again, but she still keeps coming to me. And at that moment, I had this complete download that he was still saying the same things to himself that she had said to him in life. And in a nutshell, basically, you're worthless, you're undeserving, you're no good, all those things. And he kept, saying them over and over to himself on very conscious and unconscious levels. And she couldn't be released. Like, she couldn't go until she got his forgiveness. And it wasn't just like, I forgive you, Mom. It's that he needed to stop saying those things to himself or doing those things to himself. So what she had done to him, as a child and even as an adult, he was still doing to himself, and therefore forgiveness didn't exist. And so once I understood that, then I was able to see that this is true across the board. That very often, and maybe in fact I don't know, maybe that is partly why your father came to you, because you had forgiven him, but you were still doing the same things to yourself that you believed that he had been doing to you.
Well, I don't know that I had till the moment that it occurred.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I really don't know that I had. Exactly what you just said is evidence of that. You know, I had entered into a marriage where, you know, I'm walking down the aisle going, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah.
Where some of the same patterns, not the exact same patterns, but the things that reinforced all of that unworthiness, you know, and those are still things that reemerge today, but not connected to my dad. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that I had actually forgiven him until that moment, and it was as if something of a higher intelligence really assisted me in moving through that process that day in such a complete way that it manifested itself in the healing of that subset of autoimmune diseases.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, I had another interesting awareness lately, and that is I believe that a lot of children come in, especially, you know, the question was, why would a child be sick? Why would a child come in sick? You know, and there can be many reasons. And what I was recently shown was a lot of times children are born to actually take on a parent's disease, so the parent actually never gets the disease, and the child processes it, and that it's almost like some kind of sacred agreement that I will come in. You know, we think of a child, you know, as somebody that needs to be protected from, you know, by their parent, but maybe really, you know, it's a sacred agreement, or even a higher spiritual being coming in saying, I'm gonna process this for you. So I don't know, but maybe there's a possibility that he came to you because he needed to be released himself, and that was part of it.
And he needed to be released to support me in my healing. He's very prevalent in my life today, in a very intimate way, and he's very active in the work that I do. I mean, there's just no question there. I've finally just really acknowledged that in the last year. Wow. Do you want to hear something so strange?
Of course.
Related to the sacred agreement. And I love that. I love those words being brought together here as opposed to soul contract. I love sacred agreement as a way of looking at it, because I think it gets to a whole different level of energy. Whereas in our language, even the connotation for contract can have you know, an icky kind of energy attached to it. But here's the funny thing. I was in meditation prior to coming onto the show. I just wrapped up about 10 minutes before the show started. And during that meditation, I had my older brother come to me. He was actually born when my folks still lived in India. My parents came back to the States about a month before I was born. His name was Robin, and he only lived a couple of days. And that was part of the reason why my mom decided she wanted to come back to the States before I was born. But she calls me her elephant baby because it was like 21 months she was pregnant waiting for her baby, you know? He only lived a couple of days. Actually, Mother Teresa took care of him until he died.
Wow.
And during my meditation, he came to me and he said, you know, I was just a placeholder because Mom, she just was so violating the timing that you were coming in that she needed a placeholder because she was determined to get pregnant.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, this is 10 minutes before the show started.
Wow.
So from that perspective, and I think what we're talking about, Nanice, is the difference between the human perspective and the divine perspective.
Yes.
Right? The human perspective has a really tough time making sense of things like that.
Yes.
You know, from the divine perspective, everything is perfect. You are whole. You know, there's nothing that needs to be healed from that perspective. Now, we can use that perspective to heal in our humanity, I think, and reconcile some of the things that just don't make a whole lot of sense to us. But, I mean, that's so interesting that you just brought that example up. That was 10 minutes before we got on the show.
Wow.
I mean, I wasn't even going to mention it. It was just, you know.
Of course, so connected.
He says, you know, I was just a placeholder. That was his language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
That is so interesting. So interesting. Amazing. Amazing. And I love this conversation. Recently, I've been using this more and more. I started probably doing it years and years, but now it's like almost a daily thing. And I just ask divine guidance, excuse me, to show me more, to show me a greater truth. So instead of like, why? Because, whatever questions we ask will determine the answer. So a lot of people are like, why did this happen to me? And we're going to get a very, human answer, usually based on, unworthiness, because that's the energy that we're driving the question with. Mm-hmm. So to say, show me a greater truth, what really happened here. And I've actually used this, I use this with clients, but I've used this a lot for myself, my childhood, because a lot of us, we don't remember everything that happened in our childhood. We just remember, highlights. And some people don't remember a lot at all. And just to say, well, show me what really happened. And suddenly you're able to access a whole body of knowledge that's not just, like chronological or humanity based. It's dimensional, it's multidimensional, and it really shows you like, okay, this is what really happened there. So it's like an example, an ex-boyfriend we were together for 5 years, and it was a very challenging relationship for me, and I'm sure for him too. And a few months ago I asked, show me a greater truth about this. And what I was shown was many, many lifetimes that we've been together, and how the purpose that he's really played in my lives here on this planet, and how that he had agreed to serve me. And in the things that he had done from lifetime to lifetime that, on a human basis didn't seem very kind, they were really absolutely divine. And what I'm talking about is the sacred agreement that we had was that he would protect the sacred knowledge that I carried literally from lifetime to lifetime. Now, that didn't mean protecting me. That meant that in order to protect sacred knowledge, the way to protect it is to keep a human being from remembering who they really are. Because once you remember who you really are, that knowledge is released. And then you're in, up till now, there was danger of being killed or ridiculed or, whatnot. And so his job was just to keep me from remembering who I really was. And I'll tell you, in this lifetime, he did a really good job. And that's where it comes from, instead of like, this anger and resentment that I had for him for more time than I'd like to admit, especially, live on the air, is suddenly that turned into complete gratitude. And, you did this for me. And not only did you do this for me, I'm like, not only thank you, but I am so sorry you've been doing this for me, and I've been blaming you.
I know. I had an experience like that in doing the soul journey many years ago with my ex-husband. I mean, almost the same sort of thing, where I'd been carrying this resentment for him, just, not, I don't even need to go into the details. I think we can all tap into whatever resentment with our exes. And same sort of thing where he's like, I went back and it was pre-incarnation. And I had this very clear vision. It was a very physical experience. It wasn't just like in my mind. I was really transported there. Wow. And it was basically the same sort of thing where he said, he was so excited and he was so beautiful. And I remember going, oh my God, he's so beautiful. He was just glowing and so happy to see me, and this is what I'm going to do. And he laid it all out, and I was just like, oh my God. And in the experience, I dropped down to my knees and I kissed his feet, and I was like, I am so sorry that I have made you out to be such a bad guy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because essentially, he gave me 2 children that my husband and I, the man that, I've been with for the last 12 years, who we co-create all this music and beauty together, he gave me 2 children to raise with him. Wow. I wouldn't have been able to have children by the time I met my next husband, And it was like, oh my God, how generous. Like, so again, from that perspective of the soul, yes, and from the divine agreements, it is absolutely amazing how some of the situations that create the most baggage for us are really, they were in the highest service to our evolution and to those sacred agreements.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And I think that what causes the baggage is because we don't understand a higher truth, and we tend to make up stories about things. And that's the way, up until now, that we as a society have learned to survive, by making up stories so that things make sense. Because when things don't make sense, we feel as if our survival is threatened in one way or the other. So we create stories, and unfortunately, most of those stories are stories that are fragmented and cause us, woundedness, and make us feel, less than whole and all of that. But they're just stories. So it's not even what happens. It's the stories about it. And I read this recently, that what healing is a reinterpretation of the past.
Interesting. Healing is a reinterpretation
Of the past.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate, because healing is really perceptual. Because we can heal and not be cured.
Right.
Like I've done quite a bit of work assisting people in their final transition, which is an absolutely amazing, beautiful experience. And in a couple of the circumstances, the personality, all of that humanness was really keeping people in a body that was long overdue for transition.
Yes.
Right? And it was the shift at the soul and energetic level and of perception that really freed them to make that transition in complete peace. My hope is that they won't need to come back in and deal with whatever it is that kept them in that pain, in that prison.
Right.
Which is so perceptual. So, yeah, I agree. I think it is a reinterpretation of the past. Yeah. Maybe it's a reinterpretation into the divine perspective that really creates the healing.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Because
exactly.
It's interesting. You mentioned one of the movies that we've shared called God Knows the Sound of Your Voice.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, in part of that movie, I said, and this was one of, it just happened, I was teaching a class and it was recorded, and people had commented, and I said, oh, well, let me pull that little chunk of audio and make it into, a visual meditative experience. But what I said was that up until this point, we as a human race, okay, and I know that people are in various stages in this continuum of transformation, but up until this point, we have been praying to a God of our misunderstanding from an identity of separation in a world created of illusion. And where I see us moving, or the opportunity that we're facing, is to move into a perspective, and I invite people to really imagine praying and connecting to a God of our higher understanding from an identity of wholeness in a world created of beauty and love.
Yes.
And it's just that subtle shift at the interpretation or perceptual level that creates that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. It seems to me that we are constantly making either one of two choices, and one is a separation, and one is connection or unity, fear or love, as they say. And this determines our experience at any given moment. And owning that choice can immediately shift us closer to a connection with the divine. And one of the things that I've discovered is that what we're most afraid of really is, and my words are so small here, so this is as good as I can do at this moment, is that we're afraid that God really sees us. So I love the fact, it's like God hears your voice. So, but at the same time, we're also afraid of God seeing us, because we carry all this shame and guilt and, all these energies of separation. And we're when we hide from another person, it's as if we're hiding from God. And so one of the things that I do in the healing sessions is I create this really safe space, and I just ask whoever I'm working with, just allow God to see you. And it actually begins to cause so much pain and resistance initially, but if you can just stay in that place, that open place, from an open-hearted place, let God see everything, all the things that you're most ashamed of and you have most guilt and you have the most resentment about, just let God see you. And just holding that open place for, minutes can seem like, an eternity, something shifts and something happens, because when you allow this divine forced, when you allow this divinity to see you, there's a melting that happens, and you realize that there really is no judgment, and that whatever you've done or not done, whatever you're guilty about, whatever you have regret over, whatever you have shame about, that in the eyes and ears of the divine, you are still 100% whole and worthy and loved without interruption, hesitation, or doubt. And I believe that is a true experience of wholeness, available to everyone.
Absolutely. And I love both the idea of allow God to see you as well as allow yourself to see the truth of God.
Yes. Yes.
Because I think we're not really brought up most of us are not brought up with examples of unconditional love.
No.
And we aren't brought up in our religious upbringings with that perspective either. And yet one of the things that I am very clear on is that God has evolved just as we are evolving. And that we are here to give presence to the divine in physical form.
Yes.
And to assist in the evolution, not just of humanity, but of consciousness itself.
Yes.
It has evolved. Like when you think about the Old Testament to the New Testament, we see evolutionary evidence.
Yes.
In God.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We really do. Now, the book has not been completed in my mind.
Yes.
Like it's just one chapter that we have captured, and I mean I think all of the great books of sacred wisdom that have become our religious texts reveal a snapshot of both the evolution of humanity as well as the evolution of consciousness in its highest form and potential.
Yeah.
We're continuing to write that story and making decisions in every moment as to how we either foster evolution or how we are held back by our history and our conditioning, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Beautifully said. Yeah. We had an Earth Day festival here in Salt Lake City over the weekend. I went yesterday, and it was phenomenal, and not just the music and and all the fun stuff, but the people, the energy that came together. And I kept hearing a conversation over and over again, and it was about that it's taking us so long to evolve, and the undercurrent that I heard that wasn't quite said was, is it really going to happen? Are we really going to wake up? Are we really going to be a highly evolved planet, a highly evolved species? And I found myself thinking, I love that. I found myself thinking that it's already happened, that it's a done deal. Like, I have no doubt whatsoever, and I see witness of it all around. And now what we're doing is experiencing how it happened, that it's already happened, and we get to experience and be a part of that process. But what we're really doing is remembering the past, and our evolution has already guaranteed. It can be no other way. And if you just like you're saying, there's evidence in spiritual texts, and there's evidence in people, and there's evidence even in nature. There's evidence all around us that we are evolving, and so much faster than people think. I really am astounded at the amount of evolution that we as a species and a planet are going through now. And it's not slow at all. Right? No,
it's not. I mean, if we really take a step back, see, we're so caught up in the details of the here and now, and, a year can feel like an eternity. A moment can feel like an eternity when we're uncomfortable in it. But if we look back, like, let's just go back to the 50s to now. I mean, think about how much evolution has occurred within each decade.
Yes.
The question is, do we want to dance with what is already in the process of happening and really partner with it, and cultivate whatever it is within ourselves that will assist us in both surrendering to the natural cycles of evolution, which, of course, includes cycles of expansion and constriction. And I think that's where the discomfort comes in. Because we expand, and then it's like we snap back like the rubber band. And but it's a natural process. It has been in place. It's just like a birthing process. We can't pop that baby out without having a little bit of pain. It's just,
it's a contraction, it's expansion.
It is a contraction that enables the expansion. It's like a gathering of energy.
And how the universe is made. Yes.
It is totally how the universe is made. We experience, it's kind of like the macro level down to the micro level. So we, as human beings, are experiencing those cycles in our own unique ways that, again, are aligned with our soul path.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But evolution is, I believe, constantly happening. We have tons of evidence for it. We just get to choose how we're going to dance with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the pain comes in the resistance to it. It's not even in the contraction. It's in this resistance, and it's inevitable. So it's kind of like the way that I understand it is that there is, like, when we're moving, or when we're separating, or when we're moving away from connection or divine source, that there's actually a discomfort and a pressure that builds. It builds and builds and builds, and until it becomes so uncomfortable for us in our lives. And this could be a situation or a marriage or a job or whatever it is, and it will just keep becoming more and more painful until we can't resist anymore, and then we release, let go, or make the necessary changes. Like you described in leaving your first marriage, it sounds like there was this tremendous amount of pressure and pain until you couldn't stand it anymore and had to make a change. And it seems to me that this is how we evolve. This is how the universe works. And there's this constant, it's almost like, so that infinity sign, the figure 8, it's like there's a collapsing and then a rebirth, and a collapsing and then a rebirth. And it's beautiful, it's divine, it's natural, right?
It is, and we can either fight it or surrender to it. And I think that is, God, that's the challenge. It's also interesting because when I think about evolution, as you've been talking, I think, part of the deal has been a fundamental level of dissatisfaction with the way things are. It's like if we were completely satisfied all the time, we wouldn't have innovation. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
We wouldn't have inspiring ideas. We wouldn't have given birth to all of these new technologies, or come up with a different way of looking at things. So to a certain extent, that discontent, and I've often said there's discontent with what is that propels us to make improvements, and that's we're supposed to. It's like we're prepping for the next generations. That's why we're here, and they get to come in. We have so much evidence that consciousness, as we shift in those of us that are here alive on the planet, as we evolve and in consciousness, as we transcend some of those things that have created limitations or conflict, and all conflict is sourced at the level of belief. We know that. But as we evolve and as we transcend, we create a foundation that our next generations get to come into. They don't have to start all over because we've done that work. Now we may not see the massive, amazing effects. We might not be alive and breathing to bear witness to that in the coming generations, but that's why we're here.
Right. Right, absolutely. And maybe we will. Who knows? Maybe
we will.
Maybe we will.
I mean, maybe we will from a different perspective, or maybe we'll come back in, Although, of course, we have that wonderful spiritual amnesia that we all tend to suffer from for a period of time.
Yes. And it's a gift, so that we have individual divine experiences. And it's funny that we moved in this direction, because I was thinking before when I was listening to you talk that it's really not that we have all these lives. It's really, when you really wake up and see the divine's perspective, we see that it's really just one life, that we've been playing different roles and, being different characters and having different experiences in different parts of the world. But when we really wake up, and I believe this is happening now, we will remember all our lives and realize that it was really just one life on this planet, or even beyond this planet, it's one life. And that is truly divine perspective. Right?
Well, especially when we pull back and we see that we are just one little micro organism or cell within the larger
Yes.
consciousness.
Yes.
Like, you know, it's like, I think that at some level of perspective, we could be looked down upon as, you know, just as we would look at a petri dish under a microscope.
Yes, I
mean,
know. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, to think of a cell in your body, and guess what? We are a cell in a greater body, and probably a cell of a cell of a cell of a cell. Right?
Yeah. And at any given time, I mean, the body is doing miraculous things. You know, at any given time, there are cells that are very healthy and vital and vibrant, and there are cells that are unhealthy, and then other cells are helping them along the way. It's not that different than when we talk about how human beings, you know, we are all related. We, in Lakota, we have a phrase called, it's metakuesin. And what it means is all my relations, we are all related.
Yes,
and until we begin to understand that, and I think, of course, cultivate the sense of wholeness within ourselves so that we can really, we can't necessarily perceive wholeness out there until, not fully. I'm not saying that we can't get sparks and peeks at it, but I think that's one of the most profound opportunities is to what I call return to our original intention, which is the subject of the next book. And it's so interesting you use the figure 8 and the infinity sign, and it's so part of that process. You know, we have this infinite potential that we are born to, and as we make our way back and we return to our original intention, those divine perspectives and understandings, I think, stay with us. That doesn't mean we won't be experiencing our humanness, but we'll be interacting with ourselves and our process and life and others very, very differently.
Yes, beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I love that is the ending of the show. It's so awesome. It's so beautiful. Annie, can you please tell people how to get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, we have many, many websites, and I think you listed off a couple, like divinitymovie.com, for example, is just a beautiful piece. A lot of my writing is on the blog at powerofourway.blogs.com, and I would love for people to go and download a meditation, which will then, once they sign up, they'll get a link to a couple of other audio downloads on the subject of self-healing and returning to original intention and wholeness and all of that. And that easiest one is powerofmyway.com/newreality.html. powerofmyway.com/newreality.html. And that would be a wonderful place to begin. You'll get to know my husband and myself. That was a meditation that we did at a live event that was thankfully recorded, and folks can download that as an MP3.
Thank you so much. You are totally amazing. I loved the conversation we had. I truly felt that we were having chai in Starbucks or some, beautiful little coffee shop somewhere, and I'm glad others got to share in it. And I definitely want to have chai with you again. So
I'd love to, and maybe when I come out to Salt Lake City this summer, we can connect. Who knows? We'll talk offline about that. Yeah, I love Salt Lake.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Ani. It has been my pleasure. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a beautiful evening. You're so welcome. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste. Yes. Yes. A return to wholeness is simply remembering who we really are. And as we remember who we really are, what we're really doing is putting ourselves back together, that the pieces of ourselves, kind of like puzzles. Imagine putting a puzzle together, and you bring this piece in, and you bring that piece in, and you bring all the pieces of yourself together until you have completed your own puzzle, and you have remembered yourself. And when you are completely whole until yourself, and all your pieces are put back together, then you represent that to the world as part of a greater picture, as one of those cells in a greater universal body. And people come to you and they see, oh, beautiful perfection, divine infinity, divine wholeness. And in witnessing you and experiencing you, they begin to remember who they really are. And they put the pieces of their puzzle back together. And then they go on to spread that to all they know. And truly, this is how we transform the world. It doesn't mean that we have to do anything spectacular or, write a great novel or be famous or anything like that to change the world. We simply have to be who we really are. For being who we really are truly is the return to wholeness. The return to wholeness. And the truth is that even if you don't yet know, understand, and integrate your worthiness into who you really are, it exists for you. And that's the good news. You are already whole and worthy right now. Despite any self-judgment, despite guilt, despite shame, those are just illusions. Those are just fragmentations. Those are not the truth. Simply just a story. Yes, just a story. Anything that makes us feel less than whole, anything that makes us feel unworthy is simply a story. And like all stories, when we learn and remember especially a higher truth, a divine perspective, as Annie so beautifully shared with us, then we awaken into ourselves. The awakening is simply remembering who we really are, our higher self-identity and the divine source of all. You are whole. You are perfect right now. You are whole. You are perfect. Please visit me on my website at nanice.com. That's NANICE.com. I have tons of amazing articles on awakening and being who you really are. Tons of articles, shows, and more free book download and free song downloads too. And while you're there, remember, take the pledge. It will change your life. It will help you remember who you really are. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. Thank you for joining me today. I love you. Until next week, you've been listening to Chai with Nanice. Have a great week.
Thank you for having Chai with Nanice. Please go to www.nanice.com for great free stuff that will empower you to live your best possible life. Free books, articles, shows, meditation audios, and so much more at nanice.com. That's NANICE.com. Nanice's books are also available in all major bookstores and Amazon. Check out The Infinite Power of You, Even Gandhi Got Hungry and Buddha Got Mad, Zest Point, Lip Prints, and many others by Nanice Ellis. To find out about one-on-one coaching and how Nanice can personally coach you to experience your best life possible, please email mybestlife@nanice.com.
If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And please join me on my website at nanice.com. That's NANICE.com. Thank you.